Welcome to my kitchen, and today I want to share 5 of my favorite bread recipes. I thought it would be a wonderful way to also keep myself accountable because I have had a very busy season and I have desired to do a lot of batch cooking as I have done in the past, and I have found it very difficult, but I thought to start a series where I'm sharing a lot of my batch cooking recipes, and I trust that you will also get inspired and join me as we work on today's recipes that I trust would also be a blessing for you. So join me also if you would desire to do a batch cooking so that you can make it easier for your family, as this is one of the things that we do in our budget friendly living series, and I trust this is part of it. So join me for today's video and let's get along cooking. Now, before we start, I need to say that so that you do not worry about the measurements of these recipes, I'm going to link all these recipes in a downloadable PDF, and I will link it in the description below. You can always access it and so be able to follow through with the recipes now that bread recipes are very simple. I also need to say that I will link in that downloadable still the yeast version of these recipes and the sourdough version of these recipes, because remember, sourdough is basically wild yeast that you've made at home, while the normal yeast is, the store-bought yeast. So there's a way that I will work with the yeast sometimes and also the sourdough, and I have come to learn how much yeast I will need for a particular recipe and how much sourdough starter I will need for that recipe if I'm not using yeast. So I have begun our first recipe by combining all the dry ingredients. That was the flour, 9 cups of flour, because these are 3 loaves. The sugar, the salt, mixed that and set aside. And now in my bowl, I have added 1.5 cups of sourdough starter. I have also added the oil as well as the water, half of the water, and then I will finish up with the rest as we continue to knead. And usually for this recipe, if I'm working with yeast, I will mix it in the dry ingredients when it is instant and I'm sure that it is active, and I will work with 3 teaspoons of yeast, as you will see in the description below. So if you're not working with sourdough, do not worry, I have you covered. Just work with yeast. And then mix the rest of the wet ingredients in your bowl and then add the dry ingredients to this. As they get heavy, we will now transfer to working with our hands and mix with our hands and continue adding the liquid until we have a soft dough that's fairly sticky. I like my breads not to be very firm, the doughs not to be very firm, but to be soft. Bread is a versatile ingredient that I know you would really appreciate to have around, either for breakfasts, and like I have shared on this channel before, for lunches, and sometimes it will come in handy when you want some dinner recipes like one of the ones I will make that can be very helpful. So sometimes when I have my freezer having enough bread, not that I will eat bread every day, but when it's there, then it becomes a wonderful option as a lunch, a dinner, and also a breakfast recipe. I have a bread knife on hand. Like I said, I love my recipes not too firm, the doughs. So I work with a bread knife, just a blunt bread knife, just to get the dough off my hands and then gather it in the bowl and cover it so that it can hydrate for some time before I go to the kneading stage for this bread recipe. So we will cover it and set it aside. You can allow it to hydrate for about 20 to 30 minutes, but for me it's as long as I'm working on these other recipes, so it can take even up to an hour. I don't mind, especially now that it's sourdough. But if you are working with yeast, just allow it to hydrate for about 10 minutes so that you have the bulk of the time for it to rise. So after 10 minutes, bring it back onto your surface, knead for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then allow it to proof for about an hour. and then it will be ready to bake. So this is our second recipe. Again, I have mixed the dry ingredients. This one is going to be our burger buns. You know, those can be burger buns, can be buns that you can sandwich with something else, but they come in handy. So these are basically rolls that I'm working with 6 cups of flour, the corresponding amount of sugar and salt, mixing that, and then I will continue to the step of working on the wet ingredients. I'm grateful that a lot of these recipes now, the ingredients and the measurements are mostly in my mind. I will refer once in a while, like when I was working on the recipe for sweet rolls, but most of the time I have these ones in my mind because I'm always working on this. So for this, again, we will work with a full cup of sourdough starter. If I was working with yeast for this one, I would add to the dry ingredients, like I said, and I will work with 2 teaspoons of yeast, and thankfully it's in the description below, the PDF. So to our sourdough starter, I'm adding the cooking oil. To this one, I will add 2 eggs, and then I will add a cup of milk. I'm working with whey. I had done some cheese, some mozzarella cheese, and some whey was left, so I decided to add the remaining whey into this, so about a cup, and then the rest, of course, finished off with water. One of the reasons why I love meal prepping is because you don't have to work with separate dishes, then you have to wash them. You can see the same bowl that I'm using to mix the flour is the same bowl I will use for all the recipes. I will use the same wooden spoon. I will use the same bread knife. Basically, so that by the time you're clearing, you will wash all the dishes at once and you will not have accumulated a lot of dishes. So that's also another reason I love to meal prep, together with the peace that somehow you will have when you know you have something that you can turn to. And people keep wondering about the flexibility of batch cooking. I find it very flexible because you see, if I don't feel like my family should eat any of these breads, they are safe in the freezer. I could still make something else. I could still buy something else and work with it. And then at an opportune time when I need to work with the bread recipes, I will find them safely tucked away in the freezer and still fresh. So that's why I love to work on this, because it really rescues me many times, but it also, I am not hindered from being flexible in working with my meals. So just mixing the dough until everything is well incorporated, and then we will continue to the next step. So this is our second recipe. Again, I'm going to allow it to hydrate, rest again for as long as it will take. Now that it's sourdough, the longer, there's no really problem. But if it was yeast, again, just allow it to hydrate for 10 to 20 minutes and then knead it for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then you will be ready for the longer proofing time. So our third recipe now, where we are working on our sweet rolls. So again, we are working with 6 cups of flour. We are working with about 3/4 cup of sugar. If you don't want a lot of sugar, you could work with half a cup of sugar. And then we are working with our salt. So we will stir that so that everything is mixed well, and then continue. So for our sweet rolls, because they're very nice and tasty, and if you want them really fluffy, of course, if you work with your yeast, they will be very fluffy. But with sourdough, they are a bit heavy, but still tasty. So we are going to work with about 4 tablespoons of margarine. You can use butter for a healthier option. And then we will melt that. So I'm going to melt in the microwave for about 40 or so seconds. So I like to just cover with a paper towel so that it doesn't spatter all over the place in the microwave. And then once that has happened, like at the moment now, I have melted it. Usually I don't allow it to melt until it's hot. I allow it to melt. If there's still some that is not melted, I swirl the margarine around in the plate that is microwave friendly until it's all melted. And then in my bowl, I have begun by adding the milk as well as the egg, and making sure that my melted marge is warm, not hot, because we don't want it to interfere with the working of either the yeast or the sourdough starter. So I have added those other ingredients first so that they can somehow cool it in case it is hot. But thankfully, it just got to lukewarm by the time I mixed everything else in. And so we will now add our 1 cup of sourdough starter. For this one, again, because this is 6 cups, you will add your yeast, 2 teaspoons of yeast to the dry ingredients. Again, that is if you're not using a sourdough starter. And usually I work with instant yeast, so I don't need to ensure to make sure that it is working. Most of the time it's fresh, so I just mix it into the dry ingredients. So once we've mixed all these, we will now finish off by adding the dry ingredients. Again, mix. When the dough is heavy, too heavy to work with a wooden spoon, we will now transfer to working with our hands. The reason I like to work with a wooden spoon first is I just find it helps me with handling the wetness, so that I don't have to handle a lot of wetness as I work with my hands. I get to work with my hands as I add the remaining liquid, again to get us to a soft dough. Like I said, this was a busy season, and so I ended up not having a lot of time to meal prep. And so when I thought of this idea of having you, my community and viewers, helping me remain accountable to the fact that I need to work on my batch cooking as I used to do in the past, now that it was very helpful, I thought, oh, why not just start, because the day again had started getting busy, so I started a little later. And so this bulk ferment, rather than the usual 8 hours that I like my recipes to bulk ferment with sourdough, they actually bulk fermented for 5 hours, at least most of them, others longer, now that we had that waiting time as some of them baked. But I was grateful that I could meal prep as much as, and at least they could bulk ferment, even if not for too long, but at least 5 hours was good enough for our sourdough to work in the ingredients and just work in the ingredients so that they are healthier than the usual counterpart without sourdough. So again, as usual, mixing my dry ingredients, the salt, the sugar, and the all-purpose flour. And of course, remember, you can also use all-purpose mixed with atta or whole wheat. That is still okay, or completely whole wheat if you would like to. That's still fine. By now, I was working with my final 3/4 cup of sourdough starter. I didn't have sourdough starter for my final recipe, but thank God I always try to have yeast in the house for the moments I really need yeast. So I used yeast for our final recipe. But this particular one, we are working with what I'm calling hot dog or sausage or smoky rolls, the elongated pieces that you can either work with as breadsticks, or you can sandwich them with either a hot dog or a smoky or a sausage, and drizzle on some ketchup or tomato sauce, mayonnaise. And that happens at the posting of this video happens to be our latest video on our other channel, how to make your own mayonnaise at home, so you can drizzle it with mayonnaise and enjoy. So these are the ones I'm working on. So now, because the last one I will work with yeast, I am not very concerned about time, because for these ones I want them to have time to bulk ferment during the day. For the few hours I have for the day before I bake them. So I paused fast on the last recipe and got to first begin to knead the other recipes that I had worked on. This is the 3 loaves. Usually I will even work with 4 loaves and therefore work on 12 cups of flour. But because one of the recipes, the sweet rolls, I will turn half of it into a loaf of bread, that's why I was okay to work with 3 loaves, so that the 4th one that fits into the oven, I would have it as a sweet loaf. So I have kneaded this dough for about 5 minutes. Usually if you go for 10 minutes, the better. But if I don't have a lot of time, I do 3 minutes. But if I have a bit of time like now, I do 5 minutes. I find that a good compromise to knead. So 5 minutes. And I went through all the other ones. That's the one for the burger buns, also for the sweet rolls one, and also the one for the breadsticks or the other elongated dough, the one that I'm going to use mostly for sausage rolls. So at this point, as I'm working on this last one, I have actually been working on supper. So I now got to begin to work on this last one. I'm working with about 6 cups of flour. I'm working with 2 teaspoons of salt, and then I'm going to add the yeast. But because I added salt, I'm just mixing so that it's not in direct contact with the salt. So I will add my 2 teaspoons of yeast and then the sugar. Thankfully, all the measurements are in the description below. So I'm going to mix this. So you can see it's the flour, the salt, the sugar, and the yeast. So mix that, and then because I'm running out of my bowls, I don't know where some of the others are, at least the bigger ones, I'm still going to use this bowl. So rather than work with a separate one, I have mixed and just made a well in the center. I'm going to add the oil, and then I will continue now mixing with the water until I get that nice soft dough that I like with my doughs. So that's the consistency I talked about. I will allow this dough to hydrate for again just 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes. Now that it is a yeast dough, so I don't have to give it a lot of time to hydrate, so that I'm able to knead it and give it sufficient time, at least an hour for it to proof. Yeah, so that's about 10 or so minutes later. So going to knead it for about 5 minutes, my sweet spot of kneading time. And I'm doing that, of course, as I sip on a cup of tea, Kenyan tea. So knead it and then have it in a warm place. If you don't have a warm place, like at night, you can place it over a saucepan of warm water, just to give it that warmth, that warm environment, so that it can proof. I didn't actually say what this last one was. This was actually a pizza crust dough that I'm working on. It's a new way of making pizza that I'm trying out, but I have a feeling it will work. That's why I did it. I wanted to have a way of meal prepping pizza and yet still have the dough, because I realized when I keep the dough when it is like this, sometimes it will not rise very well when you are working on the pizza to bake it. So I thought, let me pre-bake it and then add the filling later. So I trust it's going to work. That's why I have risked doing this. I plan to trim it on the top, place the filling later on, and I need to work on this crust, and then bake it perhaps for 10 or so minutes, and then our pizza will be ready. So I want to make sure all the pieces fit on my baking pan. I'm working with about 4 pieces. I have lined my big baking sheet with baking paper and just ensured to have all the pieces in sizes that can fit very well in my baking sheet. And then I have preheated the oven, so I'm going to bake them. So just bake for the amount of time that you will need to bake your pizza crust. Usually it should be about 15 to 20 minutes at 200 degrees Celsius because it's a thicker crust. But because mine is a gas oven, just behaves very funnily, so because it's a gas oven, I will allow it fast for about 10 minutes on high heat, turn them as I'm doing, and then allow them to bake for the remaining 10 or so minutes, and then they will be ready. So at this point they are actually ready. So that's what I'm going to do. Like I said, just trim the surface or even cut, because they are fairly thick, cut in between and work on 2 pizzas out of 1. It will depend, because it's something I'm trying out, but I have a feeling it will work now that I have made focaccia bread and worked with filling it also the same way, and it has worked very well. So I suspect this will work as pizza bread. So that's our first recipe that is ready now. We are good to go with it. So we will allow it to cool overnight and store it in the morning. So we are now working on our second one. And like I said, these ones have been proofing for the one I'm working on is actually about 5 hours. The others slightly longer now that, as you can see, I'm going to bake them a little later. So these are the breadsticks that I was talking about. I have divided the whole dough into 8 equal pieces. I'm going to roll it out into a thin sheet like I'm doing. The length will depend on how long you would want them. Mine ended up being very long, so you don't have to make them as long as mine. But if you're working with them as breadsticks, that's still okay, because basically, as you know, you can dip them in soup and eat them like that. So once I did that, I rolled it up, as you can see, sealed off the edges, and that was it. So that's how I make my breadsticks, or these rolls that I'm going to work with, mostly sausage rolls. So just allow them to rest for about 30 or so minutes and then go ahead and bake them. So as they are baking, we will work on our next recipe. And these are our rolls, the ones that you can use as burger rolls or you can use for sandwiches of all sorts. So these I'm also going to divide into about 16 rolls. And I will, because I'm running out of time, this is after supper, so it's getting late, and yet I'm determined to finish baking all these things. So I realized the oven will slow me down, and because I train people how to bake without an oven, I'm going to bake without an oven. But what I didn't realize is when something is baking in the oven and you're baking without an oven on the surface, it somehow affects the timings. So I ended up having them take a little longer than usual. But I thought that's fine. At least I don't have to be on the queue waiting for everything to bake in the oven. So I basically greased and dusted 2 pans, actually 3, because half of the sweet rolls I was going to turn them also into rolls, as you will see. So I greased and dusted 3 pans. So basically I'm working on each piece to form it into a round scone or round roll. So that's how I'm working on it, just making sure that it is well done, kneaded, and formed into a round piece. So now we are working on our next one. Like I said, these are sweet rolls. I'm going to work with half of this. Like I said, turn one half of it into a loaf. For this one again, I will turn them into rolls again to bake on the pan without an oven. And if you followed me on our other channel, I know you know how I bake without an oven, and you can do the same, but I'm going to make them slightly different than the normal rolls. I think I have done this method before on this channel during one of my batch baking. So basically what that means, once I have divided the dough into two, so that I set aside the one I will turn into a loaf of bread, the other half I'm going to divide it into 8 equal parts and then roll it into a long elongated piece of dough and then fold it into a knot. When you do that, it's still a roll but has a very nice shape. So those are our rolls that are ready, the burger buns that I have done in 2 pans and the sweet rolls that I have done in the other pan. So I will allow them to rest for about 20 to 30 minutes and then we will go ahead and bake without an oven. So meanwhile, our bread sticks or rolls have been baking. Again, because it's a gas oven, mostly they will not brown on the surface immediately. This happens especially with the rolls. I don't know why gas ovens are like that. So just to save on time, after 10 minutes I will come and turn and then allow them 10 minutes. Then I'll show you what we will do the last 10 minutes. But usually if your oven is just, the normal one, these ones should take about 15 to 20 minutes. But for me, I will work on them for about 30 minutes on medium heat. So for the one I'm turning into a loaf of bread, a sweet loaf, what I will do, I will also divide that into 2, though it's basically 1 loaf. I'm just explaining what I'll do to make it a little delightful in terms of its shape. I will also divide it into 2 and then divide each of the 2 pieces into 3 parts so that I form the bigger rope with 3 strands. So you can see what I am basically doing to form that loaf. So once I've arranged my ropes each in the loaf pan, I will allow it to rest for about 20 minutes to 30 minutes and then we will bake together with the other loaves. So this is 10 minutes later. So I'm going to turn these rolls or bread sticks. We are going to brush them with some egg wash. The egg wash just gives them a delightful color, as you will see. Of course, egg wash is just a mixture of egg that has been beaten together with some milk, a little milk. Because they don't brown on the surface when they are like that, for my oven, I'm going to turn them over and give them another 10 minutes in the oven and then they will be ready, bringing this to a total of 30 minutes. Meanwhile, we will bake without an oven. That is our rolls. They took longer than usual, but I know the heat, like I said, from the oven was affecting the heat on the surface now that the oven was also baking, but that was still okay. I could handle that rather than having to wait for another turn in the oven. So usually without an oven, if you're not familiar with how I bake without an oven, I allow the rolls on full flame for about 20 to 30 seconds just to heat up the pan, and then I reduce to the lowest as though I'm switching off the flame, and I get it to that very low flame, the kind that if you blew hard on it, it would actually go off. So that's what will bake our rolls for about 30 or so minutes. But for this very small burner, I don't reduce as though I'm switching off. I just reduce to the lowest setting, because for the small burner, the flame is not too hot. It's not going to burn our rolls before they are ready. So now, because by this time our breadsticks are ready, I'm going to brush our loaves with some egg wash and bake them in the oven. It should be anything from 30 to 40 minutes and this will be ready. But because this is sourdough, sometimes sourdough takes a little longer than the normal bread. So you will see what I will do just to shorten the baking time. Our breadsticks or rolls are ready. Now I personally really liked how they turned out. So you can see you can easily dip them in stew, or you can turn them into hot dog or sausage rolls because they are still thick enough for that. So after about 30 minutes or so, it's time to turn our rolls. Can go up to 40 minutes. I know this actually took longer. As you can see, because of what is happening in the oven, they cooked really slowly and they hadn't necessarily browned too much, but I knew they were ready because on the surface they were firm. Because when you're baking without an oven, you just ensure that though the surface hasn't browned, it should be firm. It shouldn't have wet dough. That tells you that the rolls are basically ready for you to turn them so that they can brown on the other side. So you are inverting them back into the pan. But before you do that, when you've transferred them to a clean lid like I have done, this is optional, but you can brush them with some egg wash. Now that I had egg wash, I thought, yeah, but sometimes I skip this. You can brush them with some egg wash and then invert them back into the pan and give them about 10 minutes. I gave them longer because they seemed to be taking long, but usually with the normal baking without an oven, usually about 10 minutes they should have browned on that upper part that was not yet browned. So I will do that to all the others, and then basically we will have our bread rolls and our sweet rolls ready. And these are basically our burger buns. So our bread was baking in the oven meanwhile, and so just to shorten the time for baking, now that I was getting late into the night and I wanted to sleep, I just inverted them and allowed them to bake. Usually if it is bread done with yeast, it gets ready faster, that's what I noticed, than sourdough bread. So when it's sourdough, I added them another 20 minutes and then that's how they baked on the surface. And they were ready, so a total of about an hour. So getting to cover them so that they can remain soft and supple. The other thing you can do to have them soft and supple, you can brush them or apply margarine or butter on the surface, but you can also cover. I prefer just to cover them with my kitchen towels. So as I'm showing you this, by the way, this is the next morning. I had a little of a late night finishing up the baking. So that's how our bread looks like. It has cooled sufficiently. And that is how our sweet loaf turned out. As you can see, when you do the braiding of the ropes, it comes out with a very nice design. And then those are our buns, burger buns, or just rolls that you can sandwich with burgers, you can sandwich with egg, or whatever you would want to do and still enjoy them. That's the other set that I didn't mind that they didn't brown all of them. Like I said, there was that challenge with the fire because of the baking in the oven, but I didn't mind this. What you can do if this happens is you basically toast them on the pan and they are good to go because they are basically cooked. And then those are our sweet rolls that I had also done differently, made them into a knot. Very nice. And I need to say, sourdough is usually fairly heavy, so if you are working with yeast, they would be even bigger and fluffier, but I don't mind sourdough. It's still sweet, and of course, like we said, healthier. And then those are our breadsticks or rolls. I really loved the breadsticks. And then finally, our pizza crust that, of course, we will turn into pizzas in the future, the near future, when we work on these recipes. So basically, those are our 5 bread recipes that usually come very easy for me by the grace of God, I would say, and I will work on them a lot without giving it much thought. And I hope that you have also been inspired as you think about baking, cooking from scratch, and working on healthy meals for your family while trusting the Lord for budget-friendly living. As is always our custom on this channel, we will finish off with a word of prayer. Father, we pray that you be with me and my viewer. Grant that you will be glorified as it pleases you to provide, to guide us into your fruitfulness, to grant us creativity in the kitchen so that all we do will serve you. We pray that our hospitality will serve you and you will be glorified in each of our lives. We thank you. We honor your name, O God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.